Hi, my name is John, and welcome to my channel, ABCs of the SAT, your pathway to SAT success. Today in video 2, we're going to be looking at a literary excerpt passage, which is always the first passage in the SAT reading section. And I'm just going to give you a brief overview, followed by 11 pages of SAT reading reference materials. And then after that, we are going to go ahead and actually work with a literary excerpt passage, which is the which is always the first passage in the reading section. Okay, let's get started. This is the first passage of the reading section that we're going to be working with. As you can see, you have 65 minutes for 52 questions. So that works out to about 13 minutes per passage. And most passages will have 10 questions. 2 of them will have 11. So that comes out to 52. And then here are the directions, but once I explain some more things about how to look at a SAT reading passage, what is said here in the directions will be much more clear, okay? And then here we have the preface. Now, you want to make sure you always read the preface because sometimes it gives you an idea as to what the passage is about. This particular case is really not a lot of information, okay? Then there's a particular way you want to look at the passage and as you're reading, and we'll get into that in the next section of this video, okay? And here we have the passage continued, and then you have the first 5 questions here. As you can see, you're going to be flipping back and forth in your test booklet, so you're going to have to get used to that, and I'll explain the way that you can later on, but that's for later in the game. Here are questions 6, 7, and 8, and then finally we have questions 9 and 10. And the next item in this particular video is going to be SAT reading reference materials. There are going to be 11 pages of them. And then what we will do is we'll actually start working with this particular literary excerpt passage, which is the first passage in every SAT reading section, okay? So let's go ahead and take a look at that. Okay, this is the first passage, this particular reading section, and as I mentioned before, it is a literary excerpt passage. Now, the other types, you're going to have 5 passages, and the other types are going to be social science passages, a dual passage, and what the SAT College Board calls Great Global Conversations passages. And we'll get into all those later on in the game. So once again, we go ahead and we want to make sure we read the preface, but there's really not much information there. As you can see in this particular passage, I underline a number of lines of text. Now, there's a specific reason this was done. What a lot of students will do is they'll start underlining every little detail in a passage, and all that's going to do is overload your short-term memory, and your critical thinking ability is going to be he's going to drop off a cliff. Okay. So what we're doing here is we're going to be applying what's called active reading. Now, what active reading means is that you're reading each paragraph and you're understanding the basic idea that's behind it. Okay, and this underlining, which is done with a purpose, you can see it's not excessive. For instance, let's take a look at the first paragraph. It references the El Casar restaurant. Then what it does is it describes the restaurant, and then here is the main character, and it describes what he's doing. He's reading a history book. Okay, so underlining just specific facts in this particular paragraph, we glance at it and we know basically what's going on. Okay, now the second paragraph, Limey here is reading his history book, and it tells different aspects of the history book. Okay, once again, we're reading actively, so we understand what's going on. In this particular paragraph, we're going to read actively, and we see that a party of four enters the restaurant. And then the narrator or the author is describing the characters, okay, and describing what's going on with the characters, right? And he's describing what Limey is doing also while these people have entered the restaurant, okay? And then here, this is a reference to Limey recognizing his father's coat, which in other words, his father entered the restaurant. Okay, and then these two paragraphs here, the author or the narrator goes into describing Limey's father, who is Mr. Peters. Okay, so just by selectively underlining certain things while we're reading actively to get a bearing about what's going on and how the passage is progressing is going to give us a leg up when we're working with the questions. Okay. Now, these literary excerpt passages, you have to treat them differently than the other four passages because there's not going to be a main idea in a literary excerpt passage. It's going to be a setting, a bunch of characters, and characters interacting. So you have to keep that in mind when you're working with the literary excerpt passage, okay? So basically what we've done here is we know there's a restaurant, Limey is sit down at a table and he's reading a history book, okay? And then some people walk into the restaurant and the narrator or the author is describing them. And one particular occasion here where the voices of these characters are bothering Limey. Then Limey's father enters the restaurant, and then what happens, the author or the narrator is describing Mr. Peters, who is Limey's father, okay? So we have that basic understanding because we actively read the passage and we underlined certain things that indicate the essence of this particular paragraph, okay? We didn't go crazy with the underlining. We didn't try to remember every little detail, right? That's going to be important when we're working with passages. And as you work with them and practice with this particular mindset, soon you'll be able to look at a passage, selectively underline different things, then go to the questions and successfully answer them, okay? One more thing, we have to realize that the correct answer to any question is always going to restate, rephrase, demonstrate, or paraphrase something from the passage. In other words, you don't have to do any subjective thinking. It's not like English or history class where you can just open up your mind and think of any particular situation or any particular convoluted answer. the correct answer is always going to reflect, restate, rephrase something from the passage. In other words, the correct answer is going to use objective information from the passage, and you may find yourself, you probably will find yourself going back to the passage to check on the information, or to get the correct information that is going to allow you to come up with the correct answer. Now, this probably sounds like very convoluted and complex, but really, once you start doing it, and we work through a few passages, it's going to seem much more clear, and it's going to make working with these SAT passages much easier. All right, so let's go on and start working with question number 1. Okay, question number 1. I'm going to read it carefully. Over the course of the package, the primary focus shifts from. Now, the first thing you want to do is just mentally cross out the word primary, or actually take your pencil and cross it out. The SAT often throws words in a question that makes it seem like you have to do a lot of hard thinking. I mean, if you look at this, the primary focus, and you go, oh my God, there's a secondary focus, there's a tertiary focus, and I have to pick out the primary one. No. Forget about the word primary. Read the question. Over the course of the passage, the focus shifts from. Well, we know that what's happening here is the author or the narrator is describing Limey reading his history book, okay? And then the rest of the passage, the author or the narrator is describing people in the restaurant. First of all, a party of 4 that walked into the restaurant. And then here he is describing Mr. Peters, who happens to be Limey's father. So answer D is a correct answer because it restates, rephrases, demonstrates, or paraphrases what is going on in the passage. So Limey's experience of reading a book, right up to here, and then descriptions of people in the restaurant. That's that right there. Okay. Now, the SAT is really good at putting in a answer choice that sounds very good, but it's incorrect, it's wrong, okay? You have to ask yourself, for instance, C, physical setting of the scene. Yeah, okay, he sort of describes the physical setting of the restaurant here. To the different characters' personality traits. Well, there's no mention of any personality traits, okay? So that answer is wrong. An exchange between strangers to a satisfying, to a satisfying personal relationship. Well, there's no exchange between strangers, and there's no mention of a satisfying personal relationship, so that's going out the window. Limey's inner thoughts to observations made by other characters. There really isn't any description of Limey's inner thoughts, and certainly the other characters are making the observations. The narrator or the author is making observations about the characters. Okay, so all A, B, and C are all junk answers. The right one is choice D. Over the course of the passage, the focus shifts from Limey's experience reading a book to descriptions of people in a restaurant. Okay? You'll see that, as we apply these particular ways of working with the passage to each question, that eventually I get to the point where it's going to be much more easier than you initially thought. Let's move on to question number 2. Okay, question number 2. The main purpose of the first paragraph is the first thing we're going to do is going to cross out mentally or actually physically main, and we're going to read it. The question as the purpose of the first paragraph is to, and the reason you want to disregard the main purpose, because it's just superfluous. The SAT puts it in there to confuse you, like you think, oh my God, there's the main purpose and there's probably secondary purpose, maybe even 10 purposes to the first paragraph, but I have to pick out the main purpose. Now, forget it. Just read it as the purpose of the first paragraph is to, well, if we go to the first paragraph, which is this right here, we'll see what's going on. Well, what is going on is that the author or the narrator is describing the restaurant, okay, and he's describing Limey, the character, primary character, and he's describing the history book. Blank pages front and back were filled with maps, drawings, dates, comic cartoons, organs of the body, and also with names and messages no longer clear and never absolutely legible. So he's basically describing the restaurant, and he's also describing the book that Limey is reading. So we go to our answer choices. And once again, reading the question, the purpose of the first paragraph is to convey the passage's setting by describing a place, okay, describing the restaurant right here, that's done right up to here, and describing an object. What's the object? It's the history book right here, the history book, and he's describing the history book right there. So once again, the correct answer C is reflecting, rephrasing, or paraphrasing text that occurs in a passage. I'll let you go ahead and decide if you want to why answer choices A, B, and D are incorrect. But once again, they're trash answers. The SAT is putting these trash answers in here to confuse you, to, if you might say, well, this particular answer sounds really smart, so it's got to be correct. No, it's not the case. The correct answer, C, once again, as you can see, it just restates something that is occurring in the passage, description of the restaurant, and the description of the history book. That's all there is. Answer C is the correct answer. Let's move on to question number 3. Question 3. It can reasonably be inferred that Irma the waitress thinks Limey is through eating line 37 because, well, once again, look at this word, reasonably. We're going to ignore it and read the question as it can be inferred that Irma the waitress thinks Limey is through eating line 37 because. So we go down to line 37, 35, 36, 37. Thought he was eating and tried to take his plate away. Okay. Oftentimes, when you're giving a line of reference to that occurs in a question, you're going to have to read a little bit beforehand and a little bit afterwards to get an idea as to what's going on. Okay, so they're dealing with 9:37. So what we're going to do is we're going to go back to line 34 and read, when Limey put down his fork and began to count them off one by one on the fingers of his left hand, the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. He stopped her, and then yada, 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 okay? So we did what we needed to. We started a little bit beforehand to really make sense of what's going on in line 37. And what happened is that Irma, the waitress, thought he was through eating and tried to take his plate away. Why? Because Limey put down a fork and began to count them off one by one on his fingers of his left hand. Whatever that refers to in the preceding sentence. But the important thing is that we know that Limey put his fork down, and Irma, the waitress, thought that, hey, he's done eating, I'm going to take his plate away. But Limey stopped her. So we go back to our question here. It can be inferred that Irma, the waitress, thinks Limey is through eating line 37 because. C, he's no longer holding his fork. Okay? Once again, that's reflecting or rephrasing or restating exactly what's happening here. And Limey put down his fork. And then the waitress, whose name was Irma, thought he was through eating and tried to take the plate away. Okay? So, once again, the correct answer to the question, it can be inferred from Irma that the waitress thinks Limey is through eating, line 37, because C, he's no longer holding his fork. Bingo. Right here. Limey put down his fork. C is the correct answer. And A, B, and D are all trash and garbage answers. Okay? So let's move on to question number 4. Question number 4. Limery's primary impression of the party of 4, line 42, is that they... Okay, once again, primary, we're going to ignore that, cross it out, and read the question as Limey's impression of the party of 4, line 42, is that they... So we go down to line 42, and the narrator or the author says, a party of 4, 2 men and 2 women, came into the restaurant, all talking at once, and took possession of the center table nearest Limey. Okay? So once again, what we're going to have to do is, in this particular case, we're going to have to read beyond line 42 to see what Limey's impression was. Okay, so in lines 45 to 55, the narrator or the author is describing these 4 characters, or some of the 4 characters that entered the restaurant. And then starting here, they laughed more than there seemed to be any occasion for while they were deciding between soup and shrimp cocktail, and their laughter was too loud. But it was the woman's voices, the terrible, not quite sober pitch of the women's voices, which caused Limey to skim over 2 pages without realizing what was on them. Okay? So he was affected by the voices of this particular group, particularly the women's voices that entered the restaurant. So if we go back to the question, Limey's impression of the party of 4 is that they are noisy and distracting. Bingo, right here. The laughter was too loud, but it was the women's choices, the terrible, not quite sober pitch of the women's voices, which caused Limey to skim over the 2 pages without knowing what was on them. So his impression was that they are noisy and distracting, which more or less describes what's going on when these 4 characters enter the restaurant and they start hooting and hollering. Okay? So answers B, C, and D are trash answers. And D particularly represent glamour and youth. I imagine a lot of students probably gravitated towards that answer because it seems kind of smart that they represent glamour and youth. And, they, for instance, let's see, where do we have it here? Young. One of the women had the face of a young boy, okay, and D represent glamour and youth, okay. You got youth in an answer here, and you got, where is that here? The face of a young boy, okay. So youth right here and young boy, this particular word in the answer choice D is known as an eye catcher. A lot of students are going to see the word youth and, oh, I remember here, one of the women had the face of a young boy, but disguised by one trick or another, blah, 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 blah. So they're going to say, since youth is mentioned in the answer choice and young boy here is in the passage, that his primary impression is that they represent glamour and youth. So don't fall for these eye catchers, which exactly youth and young boy are. It's a trash answer. The correct one, of course, is answer choice A. Let's go on to question number 5. Question number 5. There are a few things I want to point out about this particular question. First of all, if you see that the answer choices all involve references to lines, okay? And the actual question says, which choice provides the, forget about evidence, we're going to cross that out, provides the evidence for the answer to the previous question. And then here's the College Board or SAT is giving you 4 lines of text, one of them of which is going to contain the correct the information to come up with the correct answer. In other words, this is the SAT saying that the way to find the correct answer to a question is to pick out the text that gives you the information to come up with the correct answer. By the way, let's go back to question number 4 here. 4, right here, 4 and 5 are a pair. They're called command of evidence questions, okay? So what you might want to do when you first are working with the passage is quickly scan the questions and pick out all the ones that have 4 references of lines. And chances are it's going to be a command of evidence question, similar to this, which choice provides the evidence for the answer to the previous question. And the previous question is going to be 4. But we already found that the answer to question 4 was A, and it dealt with this information here. The laughter was too loud, but it was the women's voices. The terrible, not quite sober pitch of the women's voices caused Lemmy to skim over the 2 pages without knowing what was on them. So, in other words, this is once we realized we found the information for question number 4 in lines 55 to 59. So it's a slam dunk. The correct answer for question number 5 is C, lines 55 to 59. And once again, 5 and 4 are known as a command of evidence pair. And you can, if you're having problems with finding an answer for question number 4, and then you look at question number 5 and realize that it's, they're a pair, a command of evidence pair, then you can look at these particular answers or the lines of text to come up with the information for the correct answer. But since we already found the answer, the lines for the correct answer to A, to question 4, which was A, on question number 5, C is going to be the correct answer because this is the information we use to come up with the correct answer to question number 4. Okay? Hope that wasn't too confusing. Okay, question number 6. The narrator indicates that Limey finally closes the history book because, well, what do you know? This is a very straightforward question, no tricky words or whatever. Now, we read this particular passage actively, and we underlined particular portions of text that more or less indicate the substance of a paragraph. And then we realized that in this particular paragraph here, there's a reference to Limey's father. It starts out, for instance, at the top of page 68, but before Limey got halfway through them, a coat that he recognized as his father's was hung on the hook next to his chair. Limey closed the book and said, "I didn't think you were coming." In other words, he was addressing that question to his father. So the question number 6 reads, the narrator indicates that Limey finally closes the history book because the answer is his father has joined him at the table. Okay? And that is reflected in this particular part of the text here. But before Limey got halfway through them, a coat that he recognized as his father was hung on the hook next to his chair. Limey closed the book and said, "I didn't think you were coming." Okay? So, the reason to why Limey finally closes the history book is because A, his father has joined him at the table. Once again, here's the information in the passage. that allowed us to come up with the correct answer. And answer choices B, C, and D are all trash and garbage answers, and I'll leave it up to you to decide why. And we'll move on to question number 7. Question number 7. The primary impression created by the narrator's description of Mr. Peters in lines 74 to 79 is that he is, well, we're going to forget about the word primary. That's another word that the SAT is throwing in to try to confuse us. We're going to read the question as the impression created by the narrator's description of Mr. Peters in lines 74 to 79 is that he is, well, we're going to go down and read 74 to 79. And Mr. Peters' hair was turning gray and his scalp showed through on top. He had lost weight also. He no longer filled out his clothes the way he used to. His color was poor and yada, yada, yada. So essentially what the narrator is describing Mr. Peters as aging, and right here his hair was turning gray and his scalp showed through on top and shriveled. He had lost weight. Also, he no longer filled out his clothes the way he used to. So this is going to be the correct answer choice, D, aging and shriveled. Once again, the correct answer choice is going to restate or rephrase something in a passage. Once again, this question is asking us what the impression is created by the narrator's description of Mr. Peters in 74 to 79, which is that he is getting old and he's getting shriveled. D, the correct answer. We'll go on to question 8. Question 8. The main idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters, well, we're just going to ignore the word main and read the idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters. So we're looking at the last paragraph here, lines 80 to 93 or so. The first sentence is apparently he himself was not aware that there had been any change. So what this sentence is referring to is referring to the preceding paragraph where the narrator's describing Mr. Peters as aging and shriveling, okay, just getting older. And this first sentence of the next paragraph indicates that he's acting as if there was not any change, as if he has not aged and that he hasn't changed since his youth, okay? And then he goes, the narrator describes a number of behaviors that Mr. Peters is doing, okay? He straightened his tie self-consciously, and when Irma, the waitress, handed him a menu, he gestured with it so that the two women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. Both of these things, and also the fact that his hands showed signs of the manicurist, one can blame on the young man who had his picture taken with the derby hat on the back of his head, and also sitting with a girl in the curve of the moon. The young man had never for 1 second deserted Mr. Peters. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming of a man of 45. Okay. So the first sentence here, apparently he himself was not aware that there had been any change, which means that he's acting as much younger, as if he was a younger man, and ignoring the fact that he's getting old and is shriveling up. So he goes through a bunch of behaviors here, which a young man might do, trying to make gesturing with his hands so some people in the next table would recognize that he's got a diamond ring. Okay, so essentially what this last paragraph is doing is describing Mr. Peters trying to act as a young man, which of course he no longer is. Okay, and this is indicated by the last two sentences. The young man had never for 1 second deserted Mr. Peters. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming of a man of 45. In other words, he's trying to act younger, much younger than what he is. Okay. So if we look at the answer choices, the only one here that reflects or rephrases what this last paragraph is about is B. The idea of the last paragraph is that Mr. Peters behaves as if he is a younger version of himself, okay? And that's indicated by these behaviors that he's doing, I guess to impress the waitress and the girl or the women next door. And it's emphasized here in the last two sentences. The young man had never for 1 second deserted Mr. Peters. In other words, Mr. Peters is acting as if he was younger, although we know he's not. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not becoming in a man of 45. So this is the only one that is rephrasing, reflecting, or restating what the last paragraph is all about. Okay? B. Now, C, I think some students might be gravitating towards that answer. The main idea of the last paragraph, or the idea of the last paragraph, is that Mr. Peters is very conscious of symbols of wealth and power. Well, the diamond ring here, you might some students might consider that as a symbol of wealth and power, but essentially what this whole last paragraph is, it's a description of the behaviors that Mr. Peters is doing that is unbecoming of a older man. Okay, so the one that really fits is B, behaves as if he is a younger version of himself. Right? We'll go on to question number 9. Question number 9. Which choice best supports the conclusion that Mr. Peters wants to attract attention? Well, we're going to forget about the word best and read the question as which choice supports the conclusion that Mr. Peters wants to attract attention? Well, this is a very easy one. We know it's going to be answer choice B, lines 81 to 85, because in these particular lines, the narrator is describing behaviors that Mr. Peters is doing in order to attract attention. He straightened his tie self-consciously, and when Irma handed him a menu, he gestured with it so that the two women at the next table would notice a diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. Okay? And that is a behavior or an action of Mr. Peters wanting to attract attention. Once again, answer choice B, lines 81 to 85. He straightened his tie self-consciously when Irma handed him a menu. He gestured with it so that the two women at the next table would notice the diamond ring on the fourth finger of his right hand. So he did these things to attract attention. Answer choice B, bingo. Relatively simple. Let's go on to question number 10, the very last one. Question number 10. As used in line 93, becoming most nearly means, well, we know what we're going to do with this question. We're going to read it as used in line 93, becoming means, totally forget most nearly, okay? Once again, as used in line 93, becoming means. So what this is a vocabulary in context question. There's usually two of them in a passage. And if we go down to line 93 here, we discover that, or we see the word becoming, okay? So what we're going to have to do is going to have to read the sentence and insert each of these words for becoming and see which of the answer choices fits or means the same as the word becoming, okay? So let's look at answer choice A. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peters' elbow, making him do things that were not emerging in a man of 45. doesn't really make sense. Forget it. Enter choice B, fitting. He was always there, tugging at Mr. Peter's elbow, making him do things that were not fitting in a man of 45. Well, that sounds pretty good, and that is the correct answer, fitting, okay? In other words, he's doing something that is not fitting in a man of 45. Fitting and becoming, in this particular case, are words that you could use, although becoming is a much better choice if you are writing this story than fitting. But emerging and junk, developing, junk, happening, junk. The correct answer is B, fitting. So this is the very last question of the literary excerpt passage, and we'll be going on to, I will be going on and doing a similar walkthrough through the second passage. So if I could sum up, what you need to do when working with these SAT reading passages in a couple of sentences, it would be that, let's see, you're not looking for subjective answers. You don't have to put a lot of thought into finding out what the correct answer is, because the correct answer is going to restate, rephrase, paraphrase, or demonstrate something from the passage, okay? So instead of thinking very hard, what you're going to have to do is you're going to have to look at the question, go back to the passage, and find the information that allows you to come up with, well, your own correct answer. And that correct answer is going to restate, rephrase, paraphrase, or demonstrate something in the passage, okay? So that's the essence of working with SAT reading passages, okay? All right, so we're done with this particular passage, and let's celebrate. I've got a short video clip that'll be coming up, and then I will be working on the second passage and get it posted as soon as I can. So comment, like, subscribe to my channel, and I believe you'll be glad you did. Okay, bye.